Just a second to get that set up. Almost there. Just need to change a few things in the settings on YouTube. Okay. Now it is ready. I think we've got someone else logging into Zoom. Give it a second so they can get their connection set up. And then we'll get down to work. Oh, and here comes another. All right. I think that's who I would be expecting to be here. If other people come, well, if they hear us already begun, they'll realize to come a little bit earlier next time. So let's go ahead and get going. Good afternoon to everyone. Mishnah Keritot begins today. Yay! It is always a wonderful time to begin a new section of Mishnah or any new section of study. There really is no end to how much we can learn and how well we can learn together. Now, Mishnah Keritot is officially about the concept of karet. But as we're going to see, it is not just about karet in general, but also about how to handle certain types of sacrifices that are connected to transgressions that are punishable by karet. And that additional layer of sacrificial discussion is going to, I think, provide a very interesting background and openings for discussion of high holidays, which are coming up around the corner. So this should be very interesting, I think, in general, but it's even better at this time of year. So let's talk about karet before we get in. Karet is the punishment for which Keritot is named. It's literally the karets, if you wanted to pluralize it. But using karet in English is tricky. It's tricky because it comes with many potential translations, which are often potentially misleading. So I'm most of the time going to just call it karet, except if I'm reading an official translation that's in the text, and then we'll use the official translation. But a lot of times we're going to use the term karet just because it'll avoid confusion. But that means we have to understand what it is. The Torah talks about many different types of punishments. There are different ways of punishing people with a capital execution, meaning a person will be put to death for certain crimes. There is the general punishment of different fines or assessments for damages, depending upon other types of crime, whether it be theft or accidental property damage. And there is, of course, the always popular makot, which we talked about when we studied makot, which is flogging. But there is another type of punishment which goes along with many of the most severe transgressions called karet. And karet literally means to be cut or cut off or cut out. And what that means in context is sometimes not entirely clear. What it means in general by rabbinic tradition and understanding and deduction is that when a sin is punishable by karet, it is considered to mean that a person will be punished at the hands of heaven. Now that is as opposed to the hands of the human court. If somebody is a thief, they'll be punished by the court. If somebody is a murderer, they'll be punished by the court. If somebody fails to engage in brit milah for their child or then themselves when they are of age, the court will not actually punish them. The human judges are not going to do something as a form of ultimate punishment against them, but they will be liable for karet. They will be liable for this punishment at the hands of God. Now, does that mean that we would expect a lightning bolt to come shooting out of the sky? No, that's not what we mean when we say karet. Instead, what the rabbis mean by karet is that either life in this world will be cut shorter than it would have been, meaning they are causing their own life to finish before it could have gone, or that the punishment will come in a sort of special version as they transition from this world to the world to come. Now, there are some different ways to understand all of that. That's the sort of more general, broad view. Some commentators and some of the sages talk about it as being cut out of the world to come, although that's really more of a minority. Some of them talk about it as being cut from God, as losing a spiritual connection, which of course then feeds into the idea of being cut from the world to come. Others try to talk about it as being some form of excommunication, but really that is more of a modern academic interpretation. The rabbis did not consider this to be a communal excommunication. We had rules for doing that, which, by the way, had nothing to do with changing a person's status in the world to come. It only had to do with how we related to them in this world, more of like a social shunning rather than permanent damnation, as excommunication is seen in some other religions. But really, karet is not considered to be something that we handle, that we adjudicate. Now, you're probably wondering, well, if karet is all about God doing stuff in response to a person's transgression, then why are we studying this in Mishnah? What are the humans going to do about this? We already know we're supposed to follow the laws. We already know that we are required to keep the mitzvot, the commandments. And if we know what the punishment is, then once we get past the first Mishnah here, what else is there to say? Well, it turns out there's rather a lot, but I'm going to leave what we go on to talk about as part 2, because I've already left this introduction very long. So let's get into chapter 1, Mishnah 1, and see how the Mishnah talks about this, this form of punishment of karet, and specifically what transgressions result in karet.
So why is starting with number 1 and not with number 2 as usual?
Pardon?
Why is starting with one Mishnah 1 and not Mishnah 2 as usually was the beginning of every Masechet?
Oh, no. In the Talmud, every daf starts on page 2, or every Masechet starts on page 2. But in the Mishnah, it's always chapter 1, Mishnah 1. But the Talmud, originally because of a printing convention, just like in the modern world, if you look at a book, oftentimes the first numbered page will not be 1, but will be something else, because they will count the blank pages leading up to it. In the Talmud, the title page is considered the first page, and then the first page with text is always numbered page number 2. But that's the page number, not the Mishnah or chapter number. Okay, so Mishnah Keritot 1:1. There are 36 cases in the Torah with regard to which one who performs a prohibited action intentionally, very important word there in the commentary, intentionally, that a person only receives karet if they are doing this intentionally, is liable to receive excision from the world to come. I should also point out that, like other very severe punishments, this is also not only intentional, but intentionality implies that there was forewarning, meaning that if a person does this on purpose, but was either unclear or had not been warned that this was a karet offense, then that is not considered to be an intentional commission of the act. And that's going to be very important by the time we get to Mishnah 2. So if you do it on purpose after you've been warned, then you are liable for karet. I won't interrupt again. There's more I want to say, but we'll get to that eventually. So this is the list. Oh, yes, Aaron.
Was it after you were? I thought if you weren't warned, you were liable for Keritot. I thought if you were warned, you were liable to something else.
Well, it depends on the particular act. Some of these things are if you are warned that you can be punished in different ways. Some of them not, depending upon the particular transgression that we'll be discussing. So there are. It is not a. You're right. I shouldn't have said it was a complete catch-all. There is variation between some of these different actions, between some of these different points. So not all of them, when you are warned, you receive karet. Some of them, when you are warned and witness doing it, you receive execution or flogging or other types of punishment. One other thing I should point out, however, is that karet is considered to be the biggest punishment that you are able to receive. I know most of us would probably consider execution to be worse, but karet was considered to be an even worse punishment because it was coming directly from God rather than from a human court. Okay, with that as the intro, let's look at the list. One who engages in sexual intercourse with his mother or with the wife of his father, even if she is not his mother, or with his daughter-in-law. The same punishment is imposed on a man who engages in intercourse with another man, or who copulates with an animal, and a woman who brings an animal upon her to engage in bestiality. The same punishment is imposed on one who engages in intercourse with a woman and her daughter, or with a married woman. So all of these have the punishment of karet when done intentionally. If you want to know the source text for all of these, again, that is the wonderful world of Sefaria. Simply click on that paragraph, and in the commentary, you will find all of the different citations of which one. Personally, I will recommend the English explanation of the Mishnah put together by the conservative movement, where they give all of the chapter and verses for each of these different ones. But I'll close that because it makes the page look very messy.
Very interesting, Rabbi, that in the examples, the example that wasn't there is warm interaction between intercourse between woman and woman. Because men with men give a lot of things, but not between woman and woman.
Well, yes, that's actually a very good observation. We can talk maybe another time, because karet has enough things going on with it that we probably don't have time to go into the issue of homosexual relationships. But even with the most let's just call it traditional reading, everybody agrees that the Torah only talks about a interaction between a man and a man. The idea of whether women with women would be prohibited is something that is debated in later generations, but the Torah itself never says that that is prohibited on a Torah level. And that, of course, means that it would not be prohibited or not be punished by karet, because it's not mentioned as a punishable act in the Torah, and thus it would only be punishable under rabbinic decree. So yes, there is a difference in analysis between male and male relations and female relations.
Rabbi,
There's a much longer conversation to go in on that topic in general, and the conservative movement has much to say about that, and it is not all what was said 2,000 years ago, but that is a much longer class. We actually had a wonderful presentation by the Masorti movement earlier this year from Israel on the nature of the legal status and how that works in the modern world. So I'll refer you to that class. Yes, Aaron.
just out of curiosity, not to go too far off topic, but how late did they start talking about the whether or not a woman could be with a woman?
It's discussed in the Talmud.
So after the Mishnah.
I don't remember specifically in the Mishnah itself. I remember reading the sections in the Talmud, and I cannot off the top of my head tell you that it was not in reference to a Mishnah point, but certainly the discussion was much longer in the Talmud.
All right.
And we're continuing our list of 36. The same punishment is imposed on one who engages in intercourse with his sister, or with his father's sister, or with his mother's sister, or with his wife's sister, or with his brother's wife, or with the wife of his father's brother, or with the wife of his mother's brother, or with a menstruating woman. Now, all of these are going to feel very familiar from the section that we read on Yom Kippur at Mincha. And indeed, that is where the bulk of these ones are listed. And these too are liable to receive karet: one who blasphemes the name of heaven, one who worships an idol, and one who gives of his children to Molech. And a necromancer, which we talk about a little bit in this week's Torah portion, and one who desecrates Shabbat. And the same is the punishment for of one who is ritually impure and who ate sacrificial food, and who enters the temple while ritually impure, and one who eats the forbidden fat, the fat that was part of the animal that is given on the altar, is not for us to eat. It's one of the parts that is removed by the shochet, by the butcher, in order to make sure that the meat we eat is kosher. Or consumes blood, again, something that is taken care of before we eat our meat, or eats meat left over from an offering after the time allotted for its consumption, what's known as notar, or eats meat of an offering that was sacrificed with the intent to consume it after its designated time, a pigul. And one who slaughters offerings and offers them up outside the temple, meaning if you try to offer a sacrifice in your backyard, you deserve karet. And these too are liable to receive karet: one who eats leavened bread on Passover, who eats chametz, and one who eats or performs prohibited labor on Yom Kippur. Very relevant, coming up around the corner. And the same is the punishment of one who blends the anointing oil according to the specifications of the oil prepared by Moses in the wilderness. This means that you're blending it when you are not doing so for the appropriate reason, but doing it as some form of cosmetic usage or to sell it to someone. And one who blends the incense, again, according to the specifications of the incense used in the temple service for purposes other than use in the temple. And one who applies the anointing oil to his skin, meaning somebody who was not actually anointed and told to use the oil, but is doing it just for his own self. And the final two, which are going to feel a little different, and one is liable to receive karet for failure to fulfill the mitzvah of bringing the Passover offering and the mitzvah of circumcision, which, unlike the cases of prohibitions enumerated in the Mishnah, are positive mitzvot. Those are the only two you should do them, you must do them commandments, for which the punishment would be karet if you failed to do them. Every other of the 36, the other 34, are all things that you would have to do, you would transgress in order to earn the punishment. And these are the only two positive. Remember, positive mitzvot mean the mitzvot that you must do, and the negative mitzvot are the mitzvot you must not do. Bringing a Passover offering is a positive commandment. You shall do this. Sleeping with someone else's wife is a negative commandment. You shall not do that. Okay. Any other questions on our list of 36 things for which you receive karet when done intentionally? It's a long list, I know, and we could spend most of the rest of the month talking about each different piece of it, or at least the different sections. But that's not the main point of this particular Mishnah. The section of Keritot is not here to teach us this list. It's to teach us how to resolve the transgressions when they happen in different ways. The actual laws of these transgressions are all covered in other parts of the Mishnah and Talmud.
So the mitzvah of circumcision is because when the parents, they don't do that, correct? That's correct.
Well, it's two. If you are a parent and you do not circumcise your child, then you are liable for karet. And if you are a child who becomes an adult and you don't have yourself circumcised as an adult, then you are also liable for karet. The mitzvah responsibility transfers from parent to child once that child reaches the age of bar mitzvah.
And the same with a Pesach, with a Paschal offering, the same. If you don't bring the Pesach sacrifice to the temple, that's also correct.
That's also correct. And again, as we talked about when we studied Pesachim, you don't have to be the one to bring the lamb as long as you are part of the chavura, the group that is all pitching in to be part of that particular sacrifice. So you don't have to actually be the one at the temple, but you do have to be part of sending the animal to the temple. Okay, any other more general or clarification questions before we move on to Mishnah 2? Okay, Mishnah 2 is where it gets a little bit more interesting than just a list of laws. Excuse me, there's just a little something in my eye. I don't want to be blinking excessively as I go through this one. For any of these prohibitions, the ones we just mentioned, one is liable to receive karet for its intentional violation and to bring a sin offering for its unwitting violation. All right, so that's the important distinction that part 2 is bringing for us. It's reminding us, indeed, if you do this on purpose, you are liable for karet. But if you do it accidentally, so for example, if you accidentally sleep with someone else's wife, it was dark, you thought it was your wife, you didn't realize what was going on, you still have to bring a sin offering. You still have to bring a chatat, the sin offering for that violation. You're not subject to karet because you were not intentionally breaking the law, but you did break the law. And so you do need to set things right between you and God, and probably your neighbor, if it was his wife. But that means you have to bring a chatat. This is something that's covered in more detail in the book of Vayikra, Leviticus, which talks about when we commit things accidentally, when it is what we call bishgaga. It's an accidental mistake, as opposed to b'mezid, where you knowingly, intentionally are doing something. Okay, so that part, again, is pretty straightforward. We generally know if you do it on purpose that the punishment is different than if you did it by mistake. Yes, Aaron?
Does on purpose require knowledge? Is that part of the warning thing? Or is on purpose just means you knowingly slept with someone's wife and
when you slept
warning
with her, you knew she was married.
So you didn't have to know that it was against the that it was against the rules. That's not part of the requirements, as in warning.
No. So in terms of knowledge of the illegality of something, then yes, that also is usually considered to be an essential element. So it gets debated in different contexts, but most famously in the discussion of Shabbat. If somebody, let's use Shabbat as an example for sort of like different layers. If somebody thinks that it's Sunday and they light a fire to cook their breakfast, but in fact it is Saturday, Shabbat, then they have unwittingly violated Shabbat. They knew what Shabbat was, and they know that you don't make fire on Shabbat, but they thought today was Sunday. They just, their mind was in the wrong spot and they made a mistake. So that would result in a chatat. On the other hand, somebody who has no idea what Shabbat is, they were never told what Shabbat was, but they are Jewish. Often the case is used of somebody who was taken, kidnapped as a child and raised among non-Jews, and they don't know anything about the mitzvot, and they make a fire on Shabbat to cook their breakfast. That too is considered to be unwitting. And in fact, most people in that case would say they have no obligation even for a chatat, even for a sin offering, because they are totally unaware of Shabbat as a concept, let alone the specifics of what is prohibited. But the person who says, I know it's Shabbat, and I know we're not supposed to light fire, and I'm lighting the fire right now, ha ha ha, that person is the one who receives karet.
Oh, all right, Rabbi.
Yes.
And maybe it's just because it's karet, but I thought confessions were inadmissible.
Well, karet is not about confession. It's about you and God.
All right.
Right. So, God doesn't need you to confess what you did because God knows.
Then how can we leave the warning?
Then
how can
in that particular case, like we were talking about before, if there is a warning, in the case of violating Shabbat, and you acknowledge the warning and you go ahead and do it anyway, then you're not subject to karet, you're actually subject to execution.
Right. No, but in the introduction, you said if there's a warning, you're subject to karet. Am I wrong or right?
It depends on, and then I clarified that it doesn't apply for all 36. Some yes, some no. But knowledge is very important as far as the intentionality goes.
For these don't this one right here doesn't require a warning, right?
The ones that I'm describing, like the Shabbat violation, correct. And that would not require a warning, but it would require knowledge of it is Shabbat, lighting fire on Shabbat is wrong, and I am lighting fire on Shabbat. I mean, just like, for example, you could sit down on a chair that was booby-trapped to start a fire. That would not be considered intentionally lighting a fire on Shabbat. That would be doing something completely accidentally.
So one final question then. Why do they have the warning requirement of karet's between you and God when warning, I would assume, would be more of an evidentiary thing for the court?
Right, but warning is often a question of determining intentionality. There's times when somebody may not realize that what they are doing is a crime, that what they are doing is wrong, or may not realize that what they are doing is subject to the punishment of karet if they carry it out. So case by case, that can be a very important aspect of determining the person's full state of mind when they committed the act.
Right. But as we talked about earlier, you were saying that whether or not you knew or not, since the judgment is being passed by God, he knows whether or not you knew or not. So a warning would just go to whether or not you knew it was wrong. And it seems like it's irrelevant whether or not you were warned, because you could be warned and not hear it, or you could not be warned and still know what you're doing.
Right. But the warning is there to make sure that you actually understood that what you were doing not just was wrong, but was punishable by karet. Right? Someone could know that what they're doing is wrong, but not realize that it's punishable by karet. Take, for example, the sin of sleeping with a woman during the menstruation cycle. Someone may know that Judaism doesn't like that it's in the Torah somewhere, you're not supposed to do that. They may not understand that karet is the punishment for that. And if they are vague on that point, then perhaps it would not be considered to be a full intentional violation.
Right. But I mean, the only question I had, though, is whether or not you knew that, since it's being passed judgment by God, why would you need the evidentiary burden of being warned? Because I could have somebody warn me who I don't trust. I was like, that guy doesn't know what he's talking about. So you can be warned and still not think it's punishable by karet, or somebody who really knows the stuff really well cannot be warned, but still know it's punishable by karet. And if it's God passing judgment, then there's no reason to bring evidence.
But it changes your state of awareness, which is between you and God. Right? If your understanding, your kavanah, your intentionality behind the act changes because of the warning or because of the lack of the warning, then you are in a different place when you commit the act, regardless of what the rest of the community does.
Right. But
that is going to be, as we've talked about before, very case dependent. Yeah. For some people, it'll make a difference. For others, it won't. The examples you gave are good ones of someone who just refuses to hear any warning, and somebody who takes every warning, even with very little, pushing. Those are two different people, and their reaction and their guilt in different situations will vary. It's not a one size fits all.
Right, but you could still know it's punishable by karet without being warned, and it seems like that would still be the punishment if it's being passed by God. No.
Well, yes, but you would then be considered forewarned, right? I mean, like, for example, all of you now have read that 36 list, at least for the next few minutes. you're all considered to have been warned not to do those things.
I think I remember like 5 of them.
Well, yes, like I said, for a few minutes. Some of them I'm pretty sure you could lump them together, in particular, the people that you're not allowed to sleep with. But you'd probably be able to get a pretty good list if you tried putting them down. But that's my point, is that sometimes people are fuzzy on what is and is not a violation, and the Torah does not want to punish somebody with karet unless they mean to do that thing. And that intentionality is a huge part of Jewish law. More so, I think, even than in some parts of American law. The internal state is very important, and especially when we know it's the internal state between you and God.
Right. Yeah. In American law, knowing if it's illegal and knowing what the punishment is virtually never a defense.
Exactly. And that's because, and that's, by the way, that's also true as far as like much of the aspects of civil legislation in Jewish law. You know, if you borrow someone's cow and you treat it badly and you didn't realize that would put you on the hook for paying him back, that doesn't mean you're off the hook. Because among people, ben adam lechavero, between a person and a fellow, you have to maintain a certain standard regardless of ignorance or knowledge. But between us and God is able to have evidence that we cannot as a court, and can tolerate people's infractions in ways that a community cannot. You know, God can tolerate a speeder, but the rest of us can't. All right, so those are the easy ones, which should tell you what we've gotten ourselves into, right? If you're intentionally doing it, karet. If you're unintentionally doing it, chatat, the sin offering. And for their violation in a case where it is unknown to him whether or not he transgressed, he is liable to bring a provisional guilt offering, what's known as asham talui, which provides provisional atonement until he discovers whether or not he transgressed. All right, so let me try and explain this asham talui. So the problem is in the metaphysics of all of this is I've committed a sin, right? I did something, and maybe it was on purpose or maybe it wasn't, but I committed a sin. That means there needs to be redress. There needs to be balance. There needs to be some way to bring things back into order. Now, if I did it on purpose, then karet is ultimately what's going to bring that on order. Now, there are methods of tshuva, of repentance and such, but karet is the default for fixing that. A chatat is what I do if I did it on accident. And that balances my spirit with God, we're good. But what if I think I did it, but I'm not sure I did it? So let's go back to our violation of Shabbat, our starting the fire on Shabbat, right? So it's Saturday morning and I'm half asleep and I wake up and I'm moving through my kitchen and I sit down and I look back and I see that my stove is lit. And I'm like, wait a minute, did I light that? Has that been on since last night? I don't know. If I lit it, I certainly wasn't trying to light it, but I might not have lit it. It might have been just burning overnight, because sometimes you leave the stove on as a warmer to be used on Shabbat for warming up food. But maybe I don't think I was going to leave the warmer on this Shabbat, but then maybe me last Friday afternoon left it on because I always leave it on because usually I need the warmer. And so now I'm sitting there staring at this burner going, did I just break Shabbat or not? If I broke Shabbat accidentally, I need to bring a chatat. If I didn't break Shabbat, then I shouldn't bring a chatat. Right? The rabbis are very clear that bringing an offering that isn't needed is also a transgression.
It's like bracha levatala, the same concept.
It's like a bracha levatala. It's like a nullified blessing, exactly. The same way that if you say a blessing over something that is the wrong blessing or doesn't need a blessing, then that's also a problem, right? You're not allowed to just, I'll bring a chatat every day, right? I don't know what I did. Maybe I did something. Maybe I didn't. I'll just bring a chatat. That's fine. That's not the way it works. A chatat, a sin offering, is for a sin that you know you did. You didn't know you were doing it, or you did it accidentally, or whatever the unwitting part is, but you know you did it. And so your intentionality with the offering is to address the sin that you committed. And that needs to be linked. We don't just throw animals on the fire and say, I'm good. I don't know what I did, but I'm good because I burnt up a whole bunch of offerings. So that's got to shut God up, and God will stop, being mad at me because I don't think I did more than that. So that's fine.
You need
You're not
kavanah.
allowed to do that.
You need
Yes.
kavanah.
You need kavanah. Exactly right. There needs to be that link between the sin offering and the sin for which you are offering it. You can't just write a blank check and say, for whatever I did, God, this should be good enough. All right, now before we get into Aaron's question, I want to just continue this with modern application. Well, it's not just modern, but it's more familiar to all of us, which is Ashamnu and Al-Chet. During the vidui of Yom Kippur, or any time that we would like to do a more personal stock taking, right, a cheshbon nefesh, a reflection on ourselves, we don't just say, God, I messed up a lot last year. Here's a check for $25,000 for the synagogue. We'd like it. That should cover everything. It doesn't work like that. You actually have to go through the list of different things to try and not only say them because you did them, but say them to trigger the memory that you did them. Now, we have a little bit more room for this than you can do with a chatat, right? You can't just offer a dozen cows and say, this cow is for this sin, this cow is for this sin, and wonder whether you did it. But for us, verbally, we can list different sins in order to try and jog our memory and force ourselves to admit if we did something that maybe we've been pretending we didn't, in order that we can do tshuva for it during especially the time of Yom Kippur.
But it's not the same idea that to bring an korban that is not really the kavanah, because when you do Asham Vaganove or the long list, many of I hope so that many of that list I didn't do it, and still I need to repeat it to say it's just writing a blank check, just in case. So
no. Right. So this is the philosophical error that often comes up during the vidui, right? That we are saying the list in order that we will absolve ourselves, that we will be free of the guilt of that list, which, like you said, I don't know about you, but I haven't committed a lot of them. I'm not going to say how many, but I haven't committed a lot of the transgressions that are on that list. There are some that I definitely have, but there's a lot that I haven't. And that's because the list is not meant to be the final list. The list is meant to be, have you checked this? Have you checked that? What about this? And that should begin the process of reflecting on the specific cases that fall under each of those headings of the categories. So like, for example, if it says, a sin that I committed with my lips, that's not one and done. I have to then be mindful and try to think, you're right, I lied to this guy, I was insulting to that guy, I was mean to this person. You have to mentally and verbally think about the different crimes that you committed. And if it was to another person, approach them and seek forgiveness for what you did. The Ashamnu and the Al-Chet lists are not meant to be the blank check. They're not meant to be, I'll list all of these things and now I'm done. They're meant to be a checklist that forces us to consider each category. They are not a list of sins, they are a list of categories of sins that will then hopefully trigger tshuva, actual repentance, on specific problems, specific crimes. So So you're right. A lot of people get caught up in the hitting of the chest, and they think every time they hit that they're like paying the price for the sin, and they're not. They're supposed to be shaking loose all of the forgotten or hidden, knowledge of the different things they did, and then go do the work to fix them. Aaron, you've been waiting very patiently. Thank you.
Oh yeah, thanks. Back to that blank check thing. Didn't the book of Job say that Job would offer extra sacrifices?
Yes, it did. And Job is not a role model.
Oh.
So there are a lot of things that go on in the book of Job that are not Torah approved, that are not Torah valid. And indeed, many of the rabbis in the Talmud and later generations say that Job was a metaphor, that Job wasn't even necessarily a real person, that it was an extended teaching about what it is to be suffering, how to respond to it, and most importantly, how to help another person who is suffering. Because the main characters in the book of Job are Job, who is a good person and has a legitimate grievance, and his friends who are bad people who think that they're defending God. And God shows up and tells them, you're not defending me, you're defending your own weird rationalizations about why this nice person is suffering. And your rationalizations are terrible and mean, and you are not nearly as good as my friend Job. So you get out of here. And Job, you're right. I understand why you're griping, but you can't know what I know. So Job never gets a perfect answer. He never gets a full solution. But the main thing we do learn from it is don't be a jerk to someone who's suffering and tell them that they brought it on themselves. That is unambiguously what we should not do. And that's really one of the main messages of the book of Job, is that you can't blame a person for their suffering. But yes, Job is described with hyperbole as offering a whole bunch of sacrifices just in case he did something wrong accidentally, and just in case his kids did something wrong accidentally. For himself, we're going to see that could be an Asham Talui, a provisional guilt offering. He might be unsure if he did something wrong or not. He may have something in mind that he's not clear about. But definitely, you're not allowed to offer a sacrifice on behalf of the other people if they themselves have not acknowledged their wrongdoing and are doing tshuva through the sacrifice themselves. That just doesn't work with anything the Torah has taught us.
But Rabbi, okay.
Go ahead.
Doesn't the book of Job connect his sacrifices and the ones we just talked about, the extra sacrifices, with his righteousness?
The book does, as an idea of, you might think this is the most perfect and righteous person. It's building him up with hyperbole beyond what would be the normal practice, trying to paint a picture of what might be considered like the ideal saint. The book of Job is written in that hyperbolic fashion, and I know we're going down the rabbit hole of Job here a bit more maybe than everyone was hoping, but it is important, especially as we come towards high holidays, to think about that particular book correctly, because it's often used incorrectly in many sermons. The book of Job was trying to paint him as a caricature of a saint, of trying to really describe him as a way that the most common person, often ignorant of the details of the law, would imagine this is a righteous person, so that when he suffers, we will then have sympathy with everyone else who suffers as well, by saying, even him, even he can suffer. And if he can suffer, and he is the caricature of being perfect, then certainly anyone else could suffer too. And that means we can't just automatically say, well, if you're suffering, you must be a sinner. So the hyperbole is there to make a literary point, to drive home that lesson, because otherwise somebody would walk out of that story and say, well, maybe Job wasn't all that great, and that's why he was suffering. And that's exactly what his friends do. And that's why they are condemned by God in the book and by him, and why they are condemned by the sages in the Midrash as well as the Talmud. Right? The friends of Job is a euphemism for being a bad friend. And we have to paint him up as the saint in order to make that point. and prevent people from treating people in their life the way the friends of Job treated him. All right, so let's come back to this Asham Talui, this provisional guilt offering as this translation reads it. So this suspended Asham. So Talui literally means to be like hanging, like something is being held up. And what it's basically doing is putting a placeholder. It's saying, if I committed the sacrifice, then please allow this to show, or sorry, if I committed the transgression, then please allow this sacrifice to hold off on any punishment that I might receive because of my transgression, right? Suspend the punishment, hold it back until I find out what I've done. And this is my way of being careful, right? If I have committed the transgression, please hold off. I'm trying to fix it, but I need to find out whether I did or not in order to then do the correct response according to whether I did it or not. But this, in the meantime, shows that I am willing, that I am eager to restore the relationship, my balance with God, and get things back in the right direction. I'm just not sure yet if I need to do that with a chatat or whether actually no harm, no foul, there's nothing else I need to do. So this Asham Talui is this spiritual placeholder while you continue your investigation and check to see whether you can be sure that you did violate a particular transgression and which transgression and thus which remedy of sacrifice would be appropriate.
For me, it sounds like a blank check to cover your back.
Well, but it's only supposed to be when you think you might have made a transgression, a specific transgression. Again, like my lighting the stove example on Shabbat, right? Did I light that like just by accident when I walked out of the bedroom, groggy and half asleep? Or did I light it yesterday and it was just burning all the way through the night? I don't know. I'm not sure. I'll have to check. Maybe I've got security footage and I can look at it after Shabbat and find out which way I did it. Maybe I can check with my family and they can tell me about whether or not I did it the night before. Maybe somebody else did it before I woke up. Maybe, who knows? Maybe there's a mistake, a fault, and I'll find out that the stove is broken and it lit itself. Once I've done those investigations, then I can know whether or not I need to bring an actual chatat for an accidental sin offering or whether no further action is needed. Aaron.
Hey, Rabbi, does the intention have to be to commit the sin, or can you, would it be a sin to just know it happens? And an example of this, I can mention it. This was an ultra-Orthodox group as Chabad, and one of the rabbis said they were staying in a hotel, and when you walked into the bathroom, the lights turned on, and when you left the bathroom, the lights turned off. And of course, they don't turn on and off the lights in Shabbat. So if you walk into the bathroom to knowing the lights will turn on, but your purpose is not to turn on the lights, it's to actually use the bathroom, is that a violation?
Okay, so that gets into a little bit of the minutia of Shabbat law. First of all, let me just say that in the conservative movement, we do not have a problem with electric light. Right. So that's not an issue for us. But with regards to Shabbat in general, and we'll use that example just because it's the one you gave, but again, this doesn't mean that it's actually conservative interpretation of the law. The issue would be not only whether you knew whether the light would go on or not, but as you also mentioned, whether you wanted the light to go on or off. Not for something to actually take place that is against my wishes, even if I know that it is going to happen, enters into another level of investigation in Jewish legal analysis, especially for Shabbat transgressions. There has to be both intentionality as well as desirability in most things for it to be a full level Torah level violation. It can still be rabbinically prohibited, but whether or not you would have to bring a chatat, a sin offering, or whether you'd be liable for karet because you actually wanted it to happen, would depend upon intention and knowledge and desirability. So it gets more complicated than that, especially when there are some things which might happen versus some things which might not happen, versus how directly you were involved in setting the object, the action in motion versus indirect action in motion. Shabbat gets very, very complicated, very, very fast when we talk about those things. But that could be a case where there is an unknowing problem. But more likely than not, because the light went on, if you thought that was a problem and you thought you therefore had transgressed, you would bring a chatat if you did it accidentally. This is talking about where you don't know whether you did it or not. You don't know whether what you did was a transgression or not. So, for example, someone might come to me and say, Rabbi, I was in the hotel and the light went on automatically. Did I break Shabbat? That would be another place where a person might have tried to offer a sham talui in the meantime if they weren't sure what they did was a problem. But really the solution there would be talk to a rabbinic authority of your movement. Natan, I see your hand.
Yeah, physically.
The real hand, yes.
Yeah. The Asham Talui, it's like a mikdama of the Asham in case that you found your mistake. Okay. What's it in English? The provisional guilt offering.
Provisional, yes.
It's kind of a down payment for the real guilt offering. For example, if the guilt offering is I don't know, three, I don't know.
Well, the guilt offering is never going to be 3 something or other. Right? The basic chatat doesn't go by numbers. It can be if you committed 3 transgressions, but not if you are just doing one thing. It's not like, do 3 Hail Marys or 3, do 3, Our Father. That doesn't work like that as the scale for punishment.
So what is a scale? Like, for example, like a bread, because someone was for a bread, just a pita.
Right. No, the chatat was a simple animal offering, although there were certain chatat offerings, which we will see at the bottom of the page, or the bottom of this Mishnah, where it was a sliding scale, where if you were wealthy, you brought more, and if you were poor, you brought less.
Okay, so let's say that you have more than one item to bring, okay?
Right.
So let's say that you need to bring 3 birds, okay? But you already give one as the down payment, the provisional guilt. Meaning that if you found your 4, you need to bring only 2 because you already had 1 previously, or you need to bring 3 anyway. You
would need to still bring 3 anyway, in that example. Right? The Sham Talui is not, as you put it, a down payment. It's not a advance on the eventual sacrifice. It is a separate offering in case, and it's okay to do that because you are making an offering in case. So the intentionality of it is, if I did something wrong, this will cover and prevent transgression or prevent punishment for the transgression. And if I didn't, it is just an offering to God. And then once I know what my problem is or wasn't, I can bring the appropriate offering for that particular crime. Aaron.
Rabbi, the Sham Talui, is that the one you sacrifice but don't eat?
Correct.
All right.
Okay, so let's get to.
But the Leviim, yes, and the Kohanim, yes, they eat the Asham.
Parts, yes, but not the
also.
Right, but not the person who brings it.
Yeah.
Okay. The halacha, this is the halacha for all the transgressions listed above, except for one who defiles the temple. That is, he enters the temple while ritually impure, or partakes of its consecrated items while ritually impure. In these cases, he does not bring a provisional guilt offering because he is obligated to bring a sliding scale offering for a definite transgression. This is the words of Rabbi Meir. So Rabbi Meir introduces this idea that, yes, but there are, when an Asham Talui is a appropriate response if you know what your eventual sacrifice will be, the chatat. But if it's going to be a scaled offering, then you have to actually wait and be sure that you've made the proper transgression made a transgression. Proper is not quite the right word, that you've done the actual transgression so that they can then assess what you need to bring. And this is the statement of Rabbi Meir. And the rabbis say, they add to this, rather than arguing, they're adding, the halacha is the same, even with regards to one who blasphemes, one who speaks against God. As it is stated with regard to the sin offering, you shall have one law for him who performs the action unwittingly, excluding one who blasphemes, as he does not perform an action, but sins with speech. So they're making a distinction with regards to blasphemy, because it's not an technical action, because you are merely speaking rather than acting. And therefore, the law does not apply to that case, because it lacks the action that would be required.
So let me recapitulate until now, okay? Because
Yes.
I forgot how we connected the sacrifices that Hashem with the karet. So what was the connection? Why we started with the Hashem? Because we started with the karet,
Yes,
and after that we moved to the Hashem, but I forgot why. What was the bridge?
it was a while. Okay, so
Yeah,
if you do it on purpose, karet,
yes. Oh, yeah.
this list, 36, right? This list of 36.
Yeah.
If you do it on accident, a chatat, a sin offering.
Okay.
If you do it maybe, but also on accident, then a sham talui in the meantime.
Good. Thank you.
Got it. That was a good time to recap, because I think we're going to finish there for tonight, because Mishnah 3 is going to introduce a whole nother topic. It's going to introduce the topic of miscarriage and how that relates to the bringing of a chatat, a sin offering, which is something that is done after a pregnancy, and which pregnancies that don't go full term require one and which ones don't. And there's a lot that's going to be going on there that I'm sure is going to need not only explanation, but also discussion. So we'll finish there for today, and we'll pick up with Mishnah, chapter 1, Mishnah 3, next Wednesday.
Thank you, Rabbi, for the shiur. Yasher koach, and it's a very appropriate topic for Elul.
Thank you. I know that it's a different way of looking at things, because we don't often focus on the sacrifices, on the korbanot, in our day-to-day conversation. But there really is a great deal of wisdom and insight that still applies for how we approach God and each other, and how we consider our own mistakes, our transgressions. And especially as we are preparing for Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, that's always a helpful topic to have on the table. All right, everyone, take care.
Have a great
See you
evening.
next time.